Well, thank you. Thank you. No. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Well, we tried something new, working with another arm of the conservative movement to share the space of this beautiful hotel for the consecutive conventions of FJMC and WLCJ, including a joint Shabbat. We learned about communication and different organization structures. We made new friends, and we had a great Shabbat experience. We realized that in order to have the consecutive conventions, WLCJ would celebrate Rosh Chodesh Av on the first full day of our convention. We learned through study, discussion, argument, and more discussion that we could make lemonade out of lemons. We used terrific study guides and materials prepared by the WLCJ Program Advisory Team. We studied online with scholars. We completed a year of study with a fabulous siyum, and we figured out how to have fun while following the strictures of the 9 days preceding Tisha B'Av. Our fabulous speakers and scholars helped us to explore our strategic plan, our bold steps, a century of change for Jewish women, our opinions and attitudes about our North American relationship with Israel, and the history hop with some costumes, breakouts, desserts, and photos helped us prepare for our 2018 centennial celebration. We wanted to create a tzedakah project that would be compelling, engaging, and meaningful, that every sisterhood could replicate in her own community. And after researching and discussing, Matilda's Mentionables was created, modeled after Dana Marlowe's Support the Girls. Before we even arrived in Arlington, 1,000 bras had been packaged, ready to be distributed. And during the convention, 5,000 bras were collected, bagged, and labeled. It was a lot of bras. Some statistics. We had 420 delegates, 127 first-time delegates, 113 sisterhood presidents, approximately 240 volunteers. Thank you to everybody who volunteered to assist with tzedakah collection, with registration, with room setups, presenting workshops, leading services, reading Torah, presiding at meals and sessions, and every other detail that made this convention so successful. Thank you to each of you. Your time is important, and you shared it with us this week. This convention was great because of you, all 420 of us. Our beautiful t-shirts, thank you to Hetty Bellman for all of your assistance getting the shirts for each of our delegates. Our program chairs worked tirelessly, creating, changing, scheduling, changing again, rescheduling, to create the breadth of programs we engaged in this week. From sisterhood to Israel to programs just for ourselves, I thank Ellen Bresnick, Harriet Merkowitz, and Barbara Safer for your endless conference calls and emails and program grids and the final fantastic program. Now, it was my honor to chair this convention. I thank Carol Simon for having the confidence in me to take on challenging responsibilities I never imagined completing. Thank you to our marvelous directors and staff, Max and Iron in the background here in Arlington, yet performing wonders for us. Razel, who took on the responsibility of our successful Judaica craft fair on Sunday and has been managing a host of responsibilities since then. Adina, our intern, for taking over wherever we needed assistance. And I thank Rebecca, our new operations director, who could not be with us in Arlington, but who has been with us every step of the way. From New York, thank you for coming into the convention planning in the middle after things had been signed and completed without your participation. Thank you for keeping us on track and for your cool, calm demeanor. And a special thank you to Lisa Kogan and Rhonda Kahn. Without your guidance, questions, answers, discussions, meetings, printed materials, and support, the details would not have been accomplished. You picked us up when we broke down. Renee, are you seated? She is. Are you going to stay in this session? Our conference vice chair, my friend, colleague, traveling companion, and roommate. Well, not this time, but thank you for having my back at every moment, for being my eyes when I couldn't see, for being my memory when stress kept me from remembering, for being just a phone call away late at night and early for you in the morning. I could not have asked for a better vice chair of this convention. Your attention to detail, editing skills, knowledge of conference minutiae allowed me to feel comfortable that this convention would run smoothly. Thank you. We've been sharing convention with everyone back home through Facebook and Twitter, and we invite you to continue sharing everything you and your sisterhoods are doing. Encourage your sisterhoods to share, share, share. Create your own hashtags like Temple Israel Gives, hashtag Temple Israel Gives, or hashtag Beth Shalom Parties. And please tag hashtag WLCJ Rocks with anything you do. Keep telling the world the story of our sisterhoods with every tweet and post. And now, I would like to call Shelley Swalbenest. We are going to conclude this convention in Women's League style. Let's take action.
Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to call upon Lisa Kogan, Education Director of Women's League, for convention's last historical moment. Oh.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. As Eileen Rubin said to me yesterday, you know, you're supposed to be writing the historic moments, Lisa, not making them. I'm going to go off script for 1 minute, which I know you all know I never do. And I want to say that when I came to work here in 2003, there were 4 directors who were at convention. This convention, there were 2 directors. But I just want to say that had we not had Barbara Ezring and Renee Ravitch at the helm, the two most unflappable women I have ever met in my life, and I can now say that I have been honored to meet, this convention would not have happened. So thank you from the bottom of my heart to both of you. And I mean seriously. I'm a little verklempt here. As you know, we've been doing these historic moments, and as I was going through the archives looking for these, this most remarkable thing appeared to me, which I sent to the committee a while ago, but I can think of no better historic moment to talk about than this one, which very much complements what we're going to be doing this morning. In the heat of the McCarthy paranoia, Congress passed an unambiguously discriminatory bill that essentially deprived all immigrants and many natural citizens of some basic civil rights. The name of the bill, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which came to be known as the McCarran-Walter Law. That same year, in 1952, the Women's League of the United Synagogue, citing the values of justice, social justice, and equality, passed a resolution at their convention calling for its repeal. The McCarran-Walter Act remained intact. The subsequent convention in 1954, Women's League passed the same resolution calling for its repeal. Then again, the same resolution in 1956, again in 1958, again in 1960, and yet again in 1964. 7 times, our former leaders petitioned Congress to repeal the McCarran-Walter Act that patently discriminated against American citizens. While it is clear that nothing was going to move Congress at that point in time, nevertheless, our former leaders understood the principles of equal justice under the law is a freedom worthy of advocacy, if even a quixotic venture. It's a worthwhile lesson in humanity and tenacity for all of us here at Women's League for Conservative Judaism. Indeed, a moment in history worthy of celebration. Thank you.
As a family lawyer in an inner city for many years, I witnessed the impact domestic violence, the irresponsible and impulsive use of guns, disease, and unplanned pregnancy had on families and women in particular. And yes, I mourn the murder of one of my clients killed with a gun by her husband during a visitation exchange. I am proud to be part of Women's League, which through its resolutions supports issues critical to women's health and safety. Introductions will be brief, allowing for more program time. Please review our participants' complete, impressive bios in your materials. The first part of our program will be presentations by our speakers. The second part will be action workshops and advice about advocacy. You too can do it. Our goal for today, that you discover your passion and then take action. Our first speaker is Bernice Balter. Bernice served as Executive Director of Women's League for over 25 years, in fact 29 she told me, and in fact received the Women's League Staff Award in 2004. We are so excited to have Bernice speaking today on Women's League's rich history of resolutions.
I'm very happy to be back here to see a lot of my old friends, and even happier to see a lot of young faces and new members that I've never met before, and that's a wonderful sign of vigor. As you can see, and I'm happy to say, I am still alive. For obvious reasons, I'm here to talk about where we have been. Democracy abhors silence. It requires the voice of the people for its nourishment. It is the right and privilege, and I would add responsibility, of citizens to speak, to advocate, to promote their interests. Thomas Jefferson said, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." Democracy isn't something you just get once. You have to work at it every single day. And this is exactly what we at Women's League have been doing. We have a long and proud history of adopting resolutions reflecting the will of our members and acting on those decisions. From the early days, 1918 to World War II, we mostly had teas, we had many activities for the war effort, and raising funds for, quote, the poor rabbinical students at JTS. It was at that time that the then Chancellor Louis Finkelstein asked Women's League if perhaps we could raise $10,000. You know where that's gone, Lily Kaufman, well over $2 million at one point. We evolved into social activists, joining all the national Jewish agencies that convened to develop policy on a variety of issues. We have been members of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, World Jewish Congress, the Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights, and you should know that also included Catholic organizations, the National Conference on Soviet Jewry, ERA, remember that one? And the list goes on. We petitioned the government. We marched in Washington, we sponsored seminars, and produced educational materials. And who remembers our Capitol conferences? Our delegates from across the continent came to Washington for 2 to 3 days, attending State Department briefings, sessions at the Pentagon, engaging with our representatives and senators on the Hill, visiting the FBI, briefings at the Department of Justice, and in particular, and certainly one point for today's conference, we were among the first organizations to kick off the Women's Health Initiative at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which finally got federal funding. That's where, after all the years of doing research, they lumped us together with the men as if we were exactly the same. It is still going on, and I'm still part of that study, and we spun it out across the country so that sisterhoods could participate in their local communities, because they had the agency set up all around the country. How many of you have been involved in the Women's Health Initiative? Great, wonderful. They're doing important work. We petitioned the government. We marched in Washington. The body of resolutions that we adopted are testimony to our broad interest and engagement in the challenges of our times. Limitations on time prevent us from reporting on our earliest resolutions. Anyone in northern New Jersey remember the legendary Ida Crone? Where's northern New Jersey? You're all probably too young to remember her, but she was the early mover and shaker on public policy issues. In 1976, Even back then, we adopted a resolution on comprehensive national health care, and also in 1976, a resolution on abortion asserting that, quote, freedom of choice is inherent in the civil rights of women. By 1982, with the wisdom of acquired Jewish education, we realized that it needed amending to acknowledge the Halakhic conditions. As an aside, one of the problems our movement faced at that time was that the anti-abortion forces adopted the slogan pro-life, suggesting that we were somehow anti-life. It took some time for us to come up with the term pro-choice. Abortion is permitted under Jewish law, but it is conditional, and the amended resolution reflects this imperative. Quoting Robert Gordis, we said in part, abortion should be legally available, but ethically restricted. Though the abortion of a fetus is not equivalent to taking an actual life, it does represent the destruction of potential life and must not be taken lightly. We also repeated our strong opposition to legislation that interferes with religious values and tramples on civil rights guaranteed by the Constitution. And by the way, we never dealt with issues that touched on halakha without consulting with the Rabbinical Assembly Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which we, to this day, as far as I know, is our Mara Diatra. In 1984, we adopted a resolution on battered women. We were against it. I didn't know that would get that kind of response. Calling for safe shelters, support systems, and protective legislation. In 1996, we addressed domestic violence, calling again for protective legislation, programs in schools, religious institutions, health centers to raise awareness. In 1988, we adopted a resolution on negative stereotyping of Jewish women. That was the JAP era, remember that one? In our capacity as NGOs at the UN, you should know that since 1950, we have had accreditation at the United Nations as a non-governmental observer. And Florence Wolpoff's here. She's our present NGO. Where's Florence? We adopted the resolution in 2000 on global trafficking in women. In 2000, prescriptions for the elderly and underinsured, women's health insurance and inequality. In 2014, women's productive health. A sensible gun control followed many earlier resolutions on gun control. Suffice to say, we were there, along with our sister agencies, to address a wide spectrum of important contemporary issues. My friends, we live in challenging times when many of the pillars of democracy are under attack. This assembly, like others across the continent, is an important part of the continued need to fully participate in the body politic. I am delighted that we are here to do the work of a living and vital democracy. Go get 'em.
Thank you, Bernice, for such a rousing start. Our next speaker is Rabbi Cheryl Peretz, who has served as Dean of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies since 2001, after having been ordained at JTS. The multi-talented Rabbi Peretz also holds an MBA in marketing. She has taught in numerous locations and is often a scholar in residence. Rabbi Peretz.
So first, not because it's a bad place, but because I'm extremely proud of where I was ordained. I was actually ordained at Ziegler. okay. It's not your fault. Second, I want to, I was wondering at the beginning of the week how my different talks were connected or not, and now I thank you for giving me the opportunity to connect them, because you'll remember, and I want you to keep this in mind as I speak this morning, that the other night, a big theme of my part of the panel was that I'm not a feminist. I'm not a political feminist. So I want you to remember that as I share what I think are Jewish mandates for us as people of the world, as Jews and as women. And second, I feel like for those of you who heard me speak this morning after Minyan, I feel like we could just sing Listen Israel one more time and I could sit down. Because if we were to sing Listen Israel and really think about what it means to live in a world where we are the embodiment of God and our mandate for living in the world comes from God, then as we say in Rabbinic Judaism, everything else that we need to talk about today is pshita. It's simple. Because it means maintaining the dignity of everybody around us, whether that's man, woman, or child. And yet I'm aware that people often try to equate what feels like older social values with what it must have meant that Judaism, or in other religions, their doctrines must have also said as well. And I'm here to share with you what I think some of the religious mandates are that are not from 1999 or 2014 or 2015, but are from 2,000 years ago, maybe even 3,500 years ago. And so I want us to think about what it means to have had a tradition that thought about women's bodies in as much of a progressive way as the male rabbis of 2,000 years ago were actually capable of doing without being doctors and without being women and without asking women to be a part of the conversation. Because even before our tradition invited women into the conversation, the Mishnah of 2,000 years ago acknowledged that there are times when a pregnancy, when a growing potential life inside a woman could be destructive. We all know we look for the times when it's beautiful, and it's very beautiful. But there are times when it's destructive. And so the Mishnah actually says, and this is a quote, "If a woman suffers hard labor, the child must be cut up in her womb and brought out one limb at a time." And they're not talking about a 35-hour labor. They're not talking about that. They're talking about when it is a danger to the woman's life. And it says, then it goes on, it says, if the greater part of that baby has emerged into the world, then we have a different conversation. And there ensues from the rabbis a great debate about when life begins. Does it begin at birth, or does it begin at 30 days after birth? Never in rabbinic tradition, and if you're interested in reading on this, you can read any of the tshuvot of the Conservative Movement's Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. Never in any of the tshuvot does it say that life begins at conception. And this becomes really important because although we certainly cherish the sanctity of life and the potential for life, we also affirm that it's essential that a woman's life also be preserved. And that when a continuation of a pregnancy might cause severe physical or harm, or where the fetus is judged by competent medical opinion to be severely defective, that our rabbis of 2,000 years ago said, those are times to act. And I want to add here of something that you may not be aware of that was still true as of a few years ago, but is usually pretty surprising to people. And that's that 40% of hospitals in this country are governed under Catholic ethics, which means that if you have not indicated your wishes, if a woman, in the case of a birth, has not indicated her specific wishes, then if there's any question at any point of delivery of whose life to save, the baby's life will be saved, not the mother's, which, as you see, is contradictory to rabbinic Judaism. I'm not, again, denying the beauty of creation. I'm not. But there are times when we need to preserve the notion that women's bodies are not simply for the purpose of pouring out those children, and that there is a dignity to the life of the mother that is essential in deciding what to do. I want to come back to that word dignity also, because kavod habriot, dignity of humanity, is not, again, just a modern concept. This is a rabbinically operating halakhic principle that the rabbis of the Talmud bring us in recognizing that all are created in the image of God. Says the book of Isaiah, "V'haya bayom hahu shoresh ishai asher omed lenes amim elav goyim idreshu v'haita menuchato kavod." The light of the Messiah, when it blazes in the heart, teaches one to dignify all people. It shall be on that day that the root of Yishai, of the Messiah, will stand as a sign of the nations, and people will seek him, and his consolation shall be dignity. And that applies to women. That applies to gender neutrality and gender equality, which I think is a part of this conversation as well. And that applies to our mandate to restore that dignity to each and every human being. I want to say two last things. The first is that one of the things that people often want to say when they want to see things change is those times they are a-changin', right? And we have to get with the program. And that sounds kind of kitschy. And we might think that that's just simply a modern attempt to say, get with the program. But the truth is that that idea of the times they are a-changing is also as old as rabbinic tradition. It's called shinui itim. Times have changed. And it's an operating principle that says that sometimes the circumstances of society and life and understandings and progressive thinking lead us to new conclusions, and our laws have to adapt to those changing times. And certainly the areas that we're talking about this morning fall under that category as well. And lastly, lest you think that what happens out in the world, that social adaptation is also anti-religion or anti-Jewish, it too is a principle that the rabbis say we need to take into account when we're thinking about what it is that is important in determining law, advocacy, policy. And they tell each other when they're not sure in the Talmud of what to do, they say, chuk v'pazeh, go out and see what the people are doing. Go out and see what the perspective is amongst the nation. Go out and see how people are feeling and how they're affected when they're not given the power over their own body, when they're not given the ability to have representation for determining health care, when they're not given the rights to make sure that their rights are preserved. So whether it's gun control, or it's health care, or it's abortion, or it's gender equality and freedom for all to be who they are, all of these are, I believe, our religious mandate to not stand idly by the blood of a neighbor. We may not choose to take into account any one of these principles ourselves. There may be lots of women in this room who would say, I would never be the person to have an abortion. That doesn't mean that we aren't religiously mandated to help make sure that others have that right and that ability. And I want to end there with a really quick story that Rabbi Dorf told me last year. Rabbi Elliot Dorf, some of you I know him, have read his stuff. And last year, California adopted a doctor-assisted suicide law. It's a very restricted application compared to some of the other states, but you have to have a terminal diagnosis, several doctors conferring, and then there can be doctor-assisted death. And I asked Rabbi Dorf, I said, what do you think of this? Right? Because we Jews preserve the dignity of life. And he said to me, I could not be happier that that law is on the books now. He said, but if any Jew were to ask me about that particular law, I would tell them they're absolutely forbidden from using it in operation. Now, why do I tell you that here? I don't tell you that because, any of you, if you want to talk about that separately, I'm happy to. But what I loved about what Rabbi Dorf said, and what I think is so important when we're talking about advocacy for women's issues, is that sometimes what I would do, or what I believe, or what I think isn't what's important in determining what should be okay and permissible and right for everybody in the world. And would that it would be that if any of us found ourselves in the position of needing to make decisions about our bodies, or about having a gun in our midst, or about our own health care, that we would consult our religious leaders to find out what our tradition would say we should do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Peretz of Ziegler. Our next speaker is Melissa Rosen. Melissa serves as Director of National Outreach for Sharsheret, which supports the Jewish community in cancer support and advocacy with the goal of connecting as many people as possible to the support and resources of Sharsheret. Melissa Rosen.
Good morning. The women you've heard from this morning, and the ones you'll hear from shortly, are incredibly inspiring. And their messages are critically important. As women, we need to do all we can to ensure that we have access to health care and to help guide that conversation nationally. But I want to remind you of something different, yet equally essential. As you are advocating for others, please, please, please do not forget to advocate for yourself. As women, we often put ourselves last. We sit at the bottom of our own to-do lists. We have work responsibilities, volunteer commitments, and family obligations. All are important. All are worthy. And yet, we often need to be reminded that so are we. If you take one thing away from what I share today, it's to take personal responsibility for your own health. There are simple things that each one of us can do to determine our own personal cancer risk, manage it, and mitigate it. Each one of us is different and will have different needs. And in order to determine yours, you will need to know your family history first. Know your family's cancer history. Know their BRCA status. Do it now while your family's memories are clear, and not just of breast cancer or ovarian cancer, but of all cancers. The field of genetics is changing so rapidly that what may seem irrelevant today might be critically important 2 or 3 years from now. Now, once you have that information, share it. Share it with your siblings, your adult children, and your grandchildren. And one interesting point, sometimes Sharsheret will get calls saying, I know I should learn this information, but I would never have prophylactic surgery. I would never remove healthy body parts, so I'm not going to do it. I want to remind you that although Sharsheret offers no medical advice, because each one of us is different, one thing we are clear on is to never turn down knowledge. Prophylactic surgery is only one of many options that you can do to mitigate your risk. So you know your family history. Second, we must also know what is normal for our own bodies. Again, each one of us is different, and it's our own responsibility to know what's normal for us. This is because even without a genetic mutation or a strong family history, 1 in 8 women will receive a breast cancer diagnosis in their lifetime. Third, be aware for both obvious changes in our bodies, but also give credence to subtle concerns. We all know about the lump or a change in the size of a breast or skin texture. You know, I don't know if I believe in women's intuition, but I have met so many women who said, I don't know, I just felt something wasn't right. And they went to their doctors, and that saved their lives. Finally, be proactive about your total health, not just your breast health. All of those things that the doctors tell us to do actually do mitigate risk, not just for breast cancer or cancer in general, but for heart disease, diabetes, dementia. They're all win-wins. So here are a couple of suggestions. Eat well. I'm not telling you to never have dessert, to never have ice cream. What would life be without ice cream? I am telling you that when you fill your plates each meal, try and have as many colors of fruits and vegetables and whole grains on them. 2, be active. Again, I'm not asking each of you to commit to a marathon, although if you're interested, we have Team Sharsheret, and talk to me later. What I am asking is for you to walk around the block once a day. That simple act makes so much difference. And now the third thing I'm going to ask is really hard, and I know it. Be present in your lives. Reduce stress wherever you are able. I know, me too. I say these things. My husband heard me once, and he said, if you could only do what you ask everybody else to do. I know. But wherever you can, do what you can to reduce stress and take in your life as it is. Finally, commit to the appropriate screenings, the ones you and your doctors have decided on for you, and do not put them off. There is not a person in this very large room that would let a child's lingering cough go without a visit to the pediatrician. Don't each of us deserve that same level of care? If it's hard for you to prioritize your own health, and I know it can be, then change your mindset. Think of it this way. By taking care of yourself, you are modeling that behavior for your children and grandchildren, and that makes it easier. That we can't necessarily do it just for us is a whole other conference, but if you need to think about it that way, because it's absolutely true. All these things that I've spoken about will help lower risk for so many different diseases. Unfortunately, it can't prevent all diagnoses, but if the worst does occur, doing those things will help us be diagnosed earlier, which increases chances of healthy living in the future, and it may even allow for less invasive treatment. And being healthy, both physically and emotionally, gives us the strength to heal, not only from a breast cancer diagnosis, but from whatever goes on in our lives. Everyone has a Sharsheret story. When I spoke on Monday, I shared some of those stories, but not all Sharsheret stories are from those who have faced the challenge of cancer. Maybe you know someone who was helped by Sharsheret. Maybe even you were. Maybe this convention is the start of your Sharsheret story and you'll continue to be involved with this important issue. This room is filled with doers, with people who give of themselves constantly. You've made that clear in the last few days. I know this. When each one of us returns home, we are now equipped to help others facing cancer and with concrete steps to be proactive about our own health. And most importantly, we've been reminded about how important we are, our health is, and the importance of advocating for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for reminding us that we're important too. Our next speaker is Sherry Warshawski. Sherry is a physician's assistant with a Master in Public Health from Columbia University. She serves as the chair of the Nassau region of Hadassah Check It Out Breast and Testicular Cancer Awareness Program. Sherry will report to us about reproductive rights and the necessity of Planned Parenthood.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sherry, and I stand with Planned Parenthood. And I'm glad to see all of those in the room who also do. Planned Parenthood dates back to our grandmothers, great-grandmothers, and all of those first feminists in the wave of 1910. See, dramatic changes in the women's rights movement transitioned into a feminist movement. Women argued that suffrage was not only a matter of justice and also a solution to political and social problems such as prostitution, labor exploitation, and municipal corruption, and linked the women's right to vote with the progressive political reform movement. Out of this cauldron came Hadassah in 1912, Women's League in 1918, and Planned Parenthood. Okay, the origins of Planned Parenthood date back to October 16, 1916, when Margaret Sanger, along with her sister Ethel Byrne and Fannia Mindell, organized the first birth control clinic in the United States in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn. They distributed birth control advice, and information. All three women were arrested and jailed for violating provisions of the Comstock Act, accused of distributing obscene material at the clinic. Their campaign led to major changes in the laws governing birth control and sex education in the United States. The clinic was reestablished in 1921 into the American Birth Control League and was the core of the only national birth control organization in the United States until the 1960s. Some people found the name offensive and against families, so in 1942, the League became known as Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Today, as it was 100 years ago, Planned Parenthood is still fighting for our reproductive rights. Okay, so we have 100 years of facing opposition. From its origins in 1916 to 1965, when the Supreme Court finally ruled that the banning of contraceptives for married women is unconstitutional. Okay, that's a long time. That's that's some of your lives, our mother's lives. Okay, and this case came from Connecticut, which is considered a progressive state. In 1972, okay, the Supreme Court overturns a Massachusetts law prohibiting contraceptive sales to single women. Okay, but in between that, in 1970, President Nixon signs Title 10. This is not Title 9 with the sports. This is Title 10 of the Public Health Services Act, providing public funding for family planning services and sex education. And this is the backbone of reproductive health in this country. Okay, and we'll fast forward to 2009 with the successful campaign to include women's health care in the Affordable Care Act, and now the current attempts to defund it. Okay, so Planned Parenthood's motto is care no matter what. Planned Parenthood provides care to 2.4 million people who rely on approximately 650 Planned Parenthood centers for affordable, high-quality reproductive care. For many patients, Planned Parenthood is their only source of care. And when I'm going to say Planned Parenthood, it's Planned Parenthood and like clinics, because there are state-funded clinics in many states that are also working on reproductive health care. Planned Parenthood is the country's largest provider of sex education. Their educational programs reach 1.5 million people. 76 million visits to the Planned Parenthood websites each year. They have developed a Consent 101 video, which is viewed more than 380,000 times on YouTube, and 11% of their services are to men, too. The impact of Planned Parenthood health centers is huge. 616,000 Pap tests and breast cancer exams performed each year. Of that, 294,000 are Pap, 321.7 are breast exams. Let me tell you something about Pap tests. Pap tests are the best way to prevent cervical cancer. Yet, one woman dies in America of cervical cancer every 2 hours. We are talking about one of the most preventable types of cancer. Okay, 2.8 million birth control information and services provided, and get a hold of this number, 4.3 really, million tests and treatment for sexually transmitted diseases. Okay, you have I'm going to run through the next couple of slides fast. You have the affiliate medical services data, and I'm going to flip to the next, and a breakdown of the contraceptive services. You have the pill, you have injectables. You know, in 1960, Enovid was the first birth control pill, the first hormone birth control pill marketed. But now we have a wide variety of birth control methods available, and a lot of what Planned Parenthood does are the injectables and the longer acting ones that you don't have to remember to do every day. Okay, Planned Parenthood's funding, and this is where things start getting dicier. 41% are government health services reimbursements and grants. Planned Parenthood is heavily dependent upon Title X funding and Medicaid funding because they treat a lot of poor women. Okay, 33% are private contributions and bequests, and those can be you can request that they do not go to any abortion services. So they are able to divide out their contributions. 23% are non-government health services revenue. That is commercial insurance and private pay, and 3% other. Medicaid covers half of all births in the United States and 73% of all family planning. These are US figures, and I got that from the speaker last night. Okay, so Planned Parenthood is also involved in advocacy and awareness. They advocate for the legal and political protection of reproductive rights. Okay, they sponsor abortion rights and women's rights event. There's National Pink Out Day, where simultaneous events are held in solidarity with Planned Parenthood. Okay, like us, they interface with lots of other organizations, including BET-Centric, Emily's List, and Higher Heights for Americans, to amplify the voices of Black women, elected officials, leaders, and community members. They have an arm for the younger members through PP-Gen and PP-Gen Action, which are coalitions of young adults, and they have more than 300 campus groups across the country, and the Power of Pink Conference for Women's Leadership. Gee, they sound like us. And advocacy. Okay, now let's discuss the elephant in the room, abortion. Okay, abortion consists of only 3% of all services provided by Planned Parenthood. But while both Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger are strongly associated with the abortion issue today, for much of the organization's history, however, and throughout Sanger's life, abortion was illegal in the United States, and the discussion of the issue was often censored. In fact, if you noticed in the timeline, I did not include Roe v. Wade. Okay, because during that period of time, Sanger, like other American advocates of birth control, publicly condemned abortion, arguing that it would not be needed if every woman had access to birth control. Okay. Attempts to defund Planned Parenthood and other providers of women's health care services are attacks on women's health care for poor and minority women. 4 out of 5 Planned Parenthood clients have incomes at or below 150% of the poverty level. Okay, and if you don't believe me about the attacks on women's health care, go back to those hearings on birth control several years ago, when Rush Limbaugh wanted to, if he was going to pay for other people's birth control, wanted to see them in action. Okay, it is an attack on women's birth control, on women's health. Okay, in 2015, the Center for Medical Progress, an anti-abortion organization, began releasing heavily edited undercover videos of abortion providers, including Planned Parenthood. The allegations made by CMP were discredited and the group was charged, and there's still ongoing lawsuits. Following this attack, anti-women's health politicians in Congress voted 9 times to block access to Planned Parenthood. But attempts to defund Planned Parenthood have been occurring since the 1980s, and one such attempt nearly led to the government shutdown in 2011. There have been violence against abortion activists in 2012 in Grand Chute, Wisconsin, in 2015 in Pullman, Washington. There was an arsonist, and then there was the 2015 Colorado Springs shooting. Fortunately, Planned Parenthood has been able to blunt these attacks, and we've had many successes. 10 states saw officials back down, veto, or fail to pass legislation to cut patients off from care at Planned Parenthood. 13 states investigated claims that Planned Parenthood profited from fetal tissue donation, and each time, Planned Parenthood was cleared of any wrongdoing. 9 states were successful in eliminating Planned Parenthood from public health programs legislatively, but only 1 state was that legislation able to take effect. Planned Parenthood, their affiliates, and their partners have filed 8 suits against legislative and administration action to block access to care at Planned Parenthood. To date, they have blocked actions in every single case and protected access to the care Planned Parenthood health centers provide. Okay, I don't know if the last slide works, but my last slide is called It's Complicated. It's complicated were the favorite comments of my tour guide in Israel. Okay, but each dollar invested in family planning saves the states and the feds $7 for public funds later. Okay, that is a huge saving. Texas, which was the state that cut funding for Planned Parenthood and similar clinics, Medicaid births have risen 27%. Okay, Medicaid births equal more people on welfare. The Guttmacher Institute estimates that without Title X funding for family planning clinics, there would be an additional 900,000 pregnancies and 325,000 more abortions. Okay, Planned Parenthood's goal in the abortion discussion is to keep it legal, safe, and rare. Okay, and to go on, and I think Cheryl covered a lot of it with, what do you do with planned pregnancies with congenital anomalies? And this happened to a dear friend of mine, where a very much wanted child was discovered to be encephalic, and she did have that pregnancy terminated. And then there's rape and incest. In his book, current book, Life Matters, Dr. Willie Parker, a black physician in Alabama, tells the story of a 12-year-old girl with her mother in the waiting room of an abortion clinic in Alabama. When the mother stepped outside for a smoke, another patient tried to offer maternal guidance and steer the girl away from boys. "Who were you messing with?" the woman asked. "Don't you know not to go around with them boys?" The little girl summoned all of her dignity and said, "He isn't a boy. He is 53, and he is my daddy." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry, for that sad and sobering material about Planned Parenthood. Our next speaker is Meredith Jacobs from Jewish Women's International, Vice President of Marketing and Communications, an author, co-author with her daughter, and a radio host, just for a few of the things that she does. On a personal note, I can't thank Meredith enough for all of her advice and help and willingness to share her contacts in helping us put together today's program. Meredith.
Thank you. I am truly honored to be here today. I'm a proud member of my shul sisterhood. I first experienced leadership with USY. I grew up watching my mother rise through the leadership ranks of my childhood synagogue. I know the power of Jewish women. what we can accomplish when we set our minds to something. And I'm grateful to be here this morning to represent Jewish Women International. For those of you who might not be familiar with JWI, we are a 120-year-old American Jewish women's organization, first known as B'nai B'rith Women. We were the first Jewish organization to support the Equal Rights Amendment, not the first Jewish women's organization, the first Jewish organization. We were always very progressive. We have photos of our members marching for Roe. In the 80s, one of our members was shot and killed by her husband, and our mission became focused on ending violence against women and girls. We do so through awareness, education, and advocacy. Our approach is holistic. We build children's libraries and domestic violence shelters. Your sisterhoods may participate, may be a partner in our Mother's Day Flower Project, where we send roses and financial literacy resources to women living in more than 200 shelters across the country on Mother's Day. If you're not currently a partner, Women's League is a partner. Please see me, email me, sign up. Let's get your sisterhoods involved in this important project. We're in synagogues, high schools, college campuses, talking to students about healthy relationships and bystander intervention. And because we know that 99% of domestic violence victims are also victims of financial abuse, we teach women of all ages about financial literacy. We give young women, Jewish women, role models and mentors to help them grow as leaders. We advocate for legislation that protects women and promotes access to long-term economic security. This is our prevention strategy because violence is about power. And the more a woman has power and control over her body, her career, and her budget, the more likely she is to thrive. When we talk about women's health, I know the default is to think cancer and to think access to reproductive choice. But when we talk about women's health, we must talk about violence. Each year, a woman is more likely to be assaulted by her husband or boyfriend than be diagnosed with breast cancer. 1 in 4 women experience physical violence from an intimate partner. Every 14 seconds, someone calls the domestic violence hotline. 3 women each and every day is killed by someone who swore to love her. These are not statistics that happen to someone else. These statistics are the same in the Jewish community as in any other community. There are women in this room, and we can simply count off by 4, who are survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and financial abuse. I know you will hear later from young women who will talk about sexual assault on college campuses and dating abuse in high school. I want to help you understand how violence runs through every social justice issue. I'm guessing many of your congregations spoke out about the immigration ban. As Jews, we know what it's like to be a stranger in a strange land. We know what it's like to be an immigrant to this country and the role immigrants played in making our country strong and prosperous. But do you know that because of the immigration ban, women who are victims of domestic violence did not seek help because they were afraid of being deported? For those women, we must speak out, and we must fight this executive order. Title IX, which was mentioned earlier, is not just about college sports. It's not just about making sure there are women's sports teams. It's about making sure our campuses are safe and equitable for all of our students. So our current Secretary of Education, what she's doing now with Title IX, is pulling systems that protect our children who are victims of sexual assault on college campuses. I'm guessing many of you are aware of the debates around paid sick days, but did you know that paid sick days also include paid safe days? Days that allow a survivor of violence to seek legal aid, a restraining order, counseling, or even the ability to wait at home to have her locks changed. Research shows that if a worker needs to take even a half a day off due to illness or critical safety issues, the lost wages are equivalent to a household's monthly spending for fruits and vegetables. Lost wages from 3 days is equal to an entire grocery budget for the month. This means survivors are choosing between keeping their children fed and keeping them safe. For these women, we must speak out. We must call Congress and tell them to support the Healthy Families Act. The Affordable Care Act mandated physical and mental health parity. Victims of domestic violence incur physical and mental wounds. It is imperative that survivors have access to quality mental health services for issues ranging from PTSD to anxiety. For these women, we must speak out. We must make certain they have access to health care. The list goes on, but let me end with something that is happening right now, something you can call about right now. And the materials that we provided for all of you is a list of your senators by state, a description of the law I'm about to talk about. I encourage you to pick up your phones and call your senators. Because right now, men who have been convicted of committing domestic violence or sexual assault against their wives or their mothers of their children are not allowed to own guns. But a man who is convicted of domestic violence or sexual assault against his girlfriend is. This is known as the boyfriend loophole. And we know that if there is a gun in the household, a woman is 500% more likely to be killed. So I need you to call your senators and ask them to support the Zero Tolerance for Domestic Abusers Act, and your representatives, and tell them to endorse the Protecting Domestic Violence and Stalking Victims Act. When you call, tell them you are from their district or their state. Tell them the size of the congregation you represent. Tell them the strength of the Women's League. These numbers amplify your voice. And I encourage you to all go online to jwi.org. Sign up for our advocacy alerts. Each Monday, you will get in your email inbox our 321 action email that gives you 3 simple and easy action steps you can take each week to protect women and girls. You have a voice. Our country was built on the power of all of its citizens to have a voice. Use yours to protect women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. And we're all going to sign up, right? And we're all going to do that. 3 steps, 3 simple steps. Well, we would be remiss in this program if we didn't take into account and encourage the next generation. And that's what we're going to do next with our next 2 speakers, Alana and Sasha. Alana Kasindorf is a senior associate at Project Interchange at the American Jewish Committee. Previously, she was national leadership consultant for her sorority, Sigma Delta Tau, where she led workshops and trainings. We welcome Alana.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm so honored and excited to be here at this amazing convention. I currently serve as the proud national advisor to the University of Hartford's chapter of Sigma Delta Tau. Yay. Hello. And a local advisor to American University's Sigma Delta Tau chapter just up the road in DC. Prior to that, I served as a leadership consultant for Sigma Delta Tau. This means I spent an entire year visiting our college campuses. We have over 60 chapters, advising our women on recruitment, operations, risk management, leadership, programming, and more. I met over 300 collegiate women, in my time as a leadership consultant and probably drank over 600 cups of coffee, but that's a different story. I consider myself so lucky to be involved with such an amazing, fantastic organization. This year, SDT is celebrating our centennial, 100 years of sisterhood. Just a few short weeks ago, hundreds of sisters gathered in New York City to celebrate this momentous event. Our sorority was founded by 7 Jewish women at Cornell University who were excluded from college campuses because of their religious beliefs. From these women who felt capable, committed, and empowered to create a new path for themselves, Sigma Delta Tau has picked up the torch and asked our members throughout the decades to empower women on their campuses, their communities, and across the globe. Our philanthropic partners, JWI, Jewish Women International, Prevent Child Abuse America, and Women for Women International help us do just that. One of the issues that Sigma Delta Tau is actively working on is sexual assault and dating abuse. We are living in a culture that fundamentally misunderstands the facts about these issues. Nationally, 1 in 5 undergraduate women survive sexual assault before graduation, and over 40% experience some type of dating abuse. There is no typical victim. This issue cuts across all of society's measurements: economics, demographics, race, religion affiliation, and sexual orientation. This is not somebody else's problem. This is everybody's problem, and Jewish women are not an exception. Sexual assault and dating abuse, specifically on college campuses, is plagued by widespread misunderstanding. Many young people incorrectly believe that sexual assault only means a violent act committed by a stranger, or assume consent is given just because of the absence of the word no. Victims often think they are responsible for their own attacks, and many consider physical violence as the only indicator of abuse. These myths then contribute to harmful beliefs on campuses. Often, assault is disregarded if the victim knows the perpetrator or a verbal no wasn't stated. Even though the 1 in 5 statistic may seem high, sexual assault is grossly underreported. As a past leadership consultant and current chapter advisor, I can say based on my experiences, these misconceptions ring true. In my roles with SDT, I've often confronted similar situations with our women on chapter visits or during advisor conversations. As an undergraduate student not too long ago, my closest friend was in an abusive relationship. I supported her the best way I could, but at the time I did not feel educated or empowered enough to truly help. Sexual assault and dating abuse continue to be problems because we allow them to persist. Young people need to be educated and empowered to build communities that understand intimate partner violence and actively work on preventing it. We have the power to help change a campus culture of ignorance and victim blaming to one of understanding, intervention, and support. While programming on sexual assault has increased on college campuses, which is great, a lot more work is needed. College students are typically required to take an online course, maybe like 30-minute PowerPoint presentation, and sit through an hour-long presentation during freshman orientation. I can say the presentation I sat through was pretty underwhelming. To be polite, most of the girls I was sitting with were much more interested in talking to their new roommate or going on Snapchat or Instagram than watching the campus improv troupe play a very awkward, uncomfortable version of adult red light, green light. Apart from lacking audience engagement, these trainings are often inaccurate. Overwhelmingly, courses like these focus on reporting. Sexual assault prevention is often taught in a shaming framework, telling men to behave and women to be cautious, which is unacceptable. Dating abuse is rarely discussed despite its prevalence, and many programs focus almost exclusively on women. These are just a few of the reasons why JWI, Zeta Beta Tau fraternity, and Sigma Delta Tau have created Safe Smart Dating, an award-winning program that brings male and female students together to discuss and define healthy relationships and sexual violence. The Safe Smart Dating program uses interactive programming such as live discussions, news stories, and real-life scenarios to educate young men and women on the realities of sexual assault and dating abuse on their campus. It also empowers students to step in and support survivors. Safe Smart Dating helps students look for abuse in their own or their friends' relationships through the lens of power and control. We teach them to think critically about sexual assault and consent. We also focus on teaching how to intervene in situations of sexual assault and dating abuse. We tackle pressing issues such as alcohol and sexual assault, victim blaming, and the unique dynamics of abusive relationships on college campuses. Students actually get involved during the program by texting responses to moderators' questions and watching live data appear on the screen. My first experience with Safe Smart Dating was at one of our sorority conventions a few years ago. Within the first few minutes, the moderator asked the audience to respond via text to the question if we knew anyone who was in an emotional or physically abusive relationship. I was in a room of maybe about 120 girls. I watched in awe as the number above the yes column on the screen climbed to above 100. The no was about 8, 10. To say there was a shift in the room's dynamic is a drastic understatement. People recognized the challenges, they recognized the problems, and they recognized that Safe Smart Dating was a unique way to discuss this. This type of targeted programming from JWI, SDT, and DBT reaches student communities far more than a general campus event. In 2016, we hosted 13 Safe Smart Dating programs at campuses across the country, including the University of Illinois, University of Kansas, yay, Emory University, yay, Ramapo College, and my personal alma mater, the University of Rochester. Yay! Another program we offer to young women is JWI's Life Savings, a financial literacy program. Studies show that one of the primary reasons women feel unable to leave an abusive relationship is because of the power and control the perpetrator has over money. This program ensures that young women are educated about their finances and prepared to be in control. In 2016, this program was brought to 5 targeted campuses, including the University of Maryland and Rowan University. Lastly, our advocacy for women on college campuses extends to our participation with the Fraternity and Sorority Political Action Committee. Each year, we visibly express our right to petition our Congress, women and men, on behalf of collegians across the country to guarantee their rights are protected when they report sexual assault. As an advisor and a sister of Sigma Delta Tau, I am so incredibly proud of the work that our organization is doing on behalf of women everywhere. When I reflect on SDT's 100th birthday year, it is my hope that this strong bond of sisterhood will continue to empower women in the next century and beyond. Thank you so much for allowing me to tell SDT's story.
Thank you, Alana. Sobering, but so glad to hear something's being done about it as the parent of 3 young adults. Continuing in our next generation phase of the program, our next speaker is Sasha Bloch. Sasha is the Regional Director of Teen Engagement for Seaboard USY and Kadiba. In addition, she's an active member of JWI's Young Women's Leadership Network in DC, AJC's Access, and a volunteer for Alpha Epsilon Pi. Welcome, Sasha.
Good morning. As one of the 11 regional directors working with teens and congregations across the continent, it is my honor today to speak to you about the incredible work that United Synagogue Youth is doing to engage conservative teens in social action and advocacy. I have heard a lot of concern about how disengaged this generation of teens is, how all they do is sit on their phones, and how they don't know how to interact outside of the world of social media. While that may be true of some teens, that is not the case of USYs. How many of you grew up in USY? Yes. As someone who grew up in USY, social action and advocacy have always been at the core of my Judaism. Performing social action and tikkun olam, or repairing the world, are integral parts of forming Jewish identity and honoring the commandments and traditions laid down in the Torah. USY provides opportunities to help our youth better the world through volunteering, advocacy, and charitable giving on local, regional, and international levels. As a part of its program, USY has coordinated opportunities for its participants to perform acts of tzedakah and to help communities across the globe in numerous ways, including marching against gun violence at our 2012 International Convention in Boston, and visiting with immigrant teens at the Yamin Ord Youth Village in Mount Carmel in northern Israel. Over the past year, I have had the pleasure of being involved with JWI's Young Women's Leadership Network. In April, JWI coordinated a day of activism on Capitol Hill, where young women were invited to come together to confront issues like sexual assault, domestic violence, and equal pay with our nation's lawmakers. I jumped at the chance to give USY's teens the opportunity to have their voices heard. On the morning of Advocacy Day, I sat in the briefing room with my USYers and 100 other collegians and young professionals and thought to myself, what was I thinking? While I had definitely tried to recruit those whom I thought would enjoy this the most and be the strongest speakers, as I looked around the room, I worried that my teens would be overpowered by some of the other women in the room. As the briefing started and we learned about the bills we would be advocating for, I watched in absolute amazement as my teens whipped out their pens and notebooks and highlighters and started writing furiously about the bills. I peered over at their notes to see asterisks with comments like, connect to your personal story and share your own experience. These high school juniors and seniors who were 16 and 17 years old already had experience, either personally or through friends and family, with sexual assault, domestic violence, and unfair pay. All at once, I was both sad and proud. Sad that these issues affect our women at such a young age, and proud of my teens for taking the opportunity presented to them to add their stories and their voices to change things for themselves and for the next generation. As we met with the staff in the senator's offices, I continued to be overwhelmingly impressed with my teens. After a brief introduction, my teens ran the meetings with the legislative staff. They spoke eloquently about the bills from what they had learned in the briefings. They made connections between those details and their personal experiences, and they advocated for their senator's support of the passage of these bills. In that moment, I could not have been more proud of them if I tried, but it occurred to me that maybe I had underestimated my teens a little. At USY conventions, we have sichot, or conversations, about topics that are relevant to teens, from the environment to prayer to being a role model. In those sichot, we talk about the issues that affect our teens' day-to-day lives through the lens of Jewish text. When we talk about social action and advocacy in these sichot, we reflect on Proverbs 31, 8, and 9 that reads, "Speak up for those who cannot speak, for the right of all the unfortunate. Speak up, judge righteously, champion the poor and the needy." We also discuss the implications of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's quote, "In a free society where terrible wrongs exist, some are guilty, all are responsible." This is where my teens connect their passions and experiences and turn it into actionable moments and opportunities. In USY, we had taught it to them all along. It is here that our youth find the basis for their engagement in social action and advocacy. It is here that they find their inspiration, litaken olam, to repair the world. The question then becomes, how do we capture that inspiration and passion in the larger generation and turn it into action? How do we talk to our daughters, granddaughters, sons, nieces, nephews, and other communities and other youth in our communities about the importance of advocacy? This generation, believe it or not, is one of the most knowledgeable about social justice issues the world has ever seen. Those cell phones that they sometimes struggle to disconnect from constantly update them on everything that is going on in the world. They know what's happening because they are always plugged in and getting notifications about breaking news. Our jobs as their mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and mentors is to ask them, what do you feel strongly about? What are your passions? What values and rights are important to you to fight for? Asking them these questions they may or may not have ever considered before, gets the wheels turning, gets them thinking about their ability to take action, and gets them thinking about their role in changing the world. Though I would love to stand here and tell you what the exact next steps are to getting your teens engaged in social action and advocacy, I'm not going to. Not because I don't have a few ideas myself, but because what I learned from my US wires on that advocacy day back in April is that they have the tools and the experiences to guide themselves once the inspiration is sparked and the opportunity is provided. If we talk to our youth about what they are passionate about and their ability to have an impact, the only next step is for us to guide them to find their own ways to engage and advocate. The question then becomes, how do we support them in finding these connections? First, always make sure that there is a place for teens to share their views at home, at the Shabbat table or otherwise. Conversation is key to connection. Second, make sure that your synagogue and your sisterhood programs are always engaging teens in every way. Keeping the door open to the community is vital to connecting teens, not only through US-wide programs, but through congregational events and serving on committees. And finally, make sure that our youth are connected to the broader community. If they are passionate about supporting women's rights and health, help them find a local organization that they believe in to advocate alongside of. If they are passionate about the fight against sexual assault and domestic violence, help them connect to the local movement and let them learn how to be advocates for themselves and their peers. The key is not telling them what to care about and how to get involved, but letting what they care about guide their involvement. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said that she is a judge born, raised, and proud of being a Jew, and the demand for justice runs through the entirety of the Jewish tradition. It is this justice and our service in that justice that we must aim to inspire in our teens. It is that fight for justice that we must inspire in our youth to advocate for themselves and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha, for those tools and advice. Makes me feel much better. Okay, so now that we've heard from all of these inspiring speakers, what do? Our final presenter is Susan Turnbull, past chair of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs and past chair of JWI, who will speak about just that. Susan.
Thank you. And I just want to note, before the previous two speakers, she talked about the next generation. I'm not the next generation. When the first speaker was speaking this morning, they talked about 1952 and the bills, the first resolution that was passed by the Women's League. I was born in 1952. And another year that is important is 1918, the year the Women's League started. My mom was born in 1918. So it's terrific to be here with you. And I'm sure you're inspired. I'm inspired too. all of these speakers have told you a story, have told you something that you might not have known, and I hope they've touched a chord. With me, one of the first stories I heard that sort of brought a smile to my face was the story about Planned Parenthood, because all of us hear about Planned Parenthood. And I want to start and say one thing. The state of Maryland, where I live, has passed legislation this year that regardless of what happens in at the national level, Planned Parenthood is going to be funded in Maryland. We can be part of something that happens everywhere. My Planned Parenthood story is, in 1979, I had been married a few years, and my husband and I decided we were going to have children. My father had been sick and was an older father, and my parents were older, and I basically said, I'm going to have my kids now. So I got pregnant, like, immediately. And I was embarrassed to go back to my doctor for the pregnancy test. At that point, you couldn't go to the grocery store and buy them. And so I went to Planned Parenthood to find out if I were pregnant or not, and then I'd go to my doctor. And I was, and he's now 37 and has a child of his own. So when we think of Planned Parenthood, don't always think abortion. Think of Planned Parenthood. I'm here sort of as the, I don't know, in baseball you say I'm the batter who's up to bring the people home. And what I'm here is pretty much the cleanup hitter. And I'm here largely to remind you exactly what Sasha said. It's telling your personal story, and I'm going to tell you mine. I hope it's going to demonstrate how one's voice can change as our Jewish values call us to action for Tikkun Olam. I'm here today because of issues of women's preventive health care became my passion in an unexpected way. I saw that many of you share my background. I look out this room and I see people whose faces are familiar. Maybe I knew you in USY. I grew up in Cleveland Heights, extremely connected to my synagogue, and I was, thank you. I was actually president of my USY chapter. Of course, I was secretary first because in those days, that's what we did, and I was very active at both the regional and national level. And I was extremely connected. In 9th grade, in 1967, I attended my first Cruzy convention in Pittsburgh. The weekend's theme was Justice, Justice, You Shall Pursue, and those words made a lasting impression. That same year, I came to Washington with my civics class. It was my first trip to Washington, and I fell in love with the city. Actually, we stayed in a hotel just right around here. It's been raised, but it was right around here. So when I applied to graduate school, I only looked at colleges in this area. I didn't look to go to college here because I couldn't afford to. And shortly after moving here, I wound up working for United States Senator Howard Metzenbaum, who was appointed, may he rest in peace, who was appointed to the U.S. Senate as a consequence of the Saturday Night Massacre. Many of you might not know that. I know I'm sounding like someone else, but in fact, it was an interesting thing because he was appointed to the Senate. He lost to John Glenn a few months later and then came back 2 years and was elected for several terms. It was in that office that I met a law student who was working in our office. He was my future husband, now my husband of 40 years, and we chose to build our family here in the Washington area. As a young working mom, I was the epitome of the sandwich generation. I was a person caring for small children and supporting parents at the same time. In my case, I was only 26 when my father had a heart attack and stroke that debilitated him for the rest of his life. And only 33 with 2 small children when my mom was diagnosed with a neurological disorder, a condition that eventually caused her to move into a nursing home at age 67. She was there with her friends' moms. In addition, there were serious pressures for my family because as my dad was a retired cab driver and my mom a department store saleswoman, they had very limited resources and they depended on their children. My mom, during her years in her care facility, it was Menorah Park in Cleveland, in Beechwood, Ohio, was a Medicaid patient. Keep remembering that. You heard about pregnancies and Medicaid patients. My mom was a Medicaid patient. But my life changed forever 7 years later when, by accident, a nurse's aide felt a large lump to be cancerous. Within days, it was biopsied and found, and we were advised that a mastectomy was the right course to extend her quality of life. So it was quickly scheduled. Unfortunately, and shockingly, she went into cardiac arrest and died in recovery after surgery. This happened because of what you heard a little bit before. There wasn't early detection. By the time this was discovered, her physical strength was not enough to withstand that surgery. We were devastated, as you can imagine, and we couldn't let go. So coming back to Maryland a few days later, I called an acquaintance who owned a chain of nursing homes. When I described what had happened and explained that we had learned that my mother had not had a mammogram during her 7 years in the facility, my friend Harvey wasn't surprised. He bluntly told me that people in nursing homes typically are treated only for the illnesses that brought them into those facilities. There is limited preventive care. I was floored. How could that be? If anyone had ever looked at my mom's medical history, they would have known. My grandmother died of premenopausal breast cancer. My mom was an only child, but all 3 of her aunts had developed breast cancer in their lifetimes. Why hadn't anybody paid attention? And this nursing home was one that was supposed to be one with, a sterling reputation. Why hadn't she ever been screened? So when my friends came for a Shiva call, I told them what had happened. And to make a long story short, 2 legislators took me to see the governor of Maryland later that month to tell him the story. Within 2 minutes, Governor Donald Schaefer got on the phone with the head of the Maryland Nursing Home Association, and he established a task force to review the issue. He included my friend, who had advised me on the lack of preventive care in these facilities. And a year later, on Mother's Day, we announced that Maryland had developed protocols ensuring that all female nursing home residents would be regularly screened for breast cancer and all male residents would be screened for prostate cancer. Since early detection is a key element in prevention, in the last 25 years, countless lives have been saved in Maryland. But bear in mind, Maryland's not the only place in this country. Everyone, everywhere could do this in their state. It all happened because I asked a question, and because my years of involvement in politics enabled me to use my voice to right a wrong. Each person has a story. Hopefully not as dramatic as mine, but each person in this room knows someone that will be affected by the changes in the healthcare legislation being debated this week in the Senate. Everyone's story is worth repeating and telling. If you've never picked up the phone or written an email to a member of Congress, now is the time. Last week, I spent time with my brother and sister-in-law. One suffers from Parkinson's disease, the other from MS. It's really, what can I tell you? These are pre-existing conditions with enormously expensive prescriptions that would have bankrupted them years ago without the supplemental insurance. Millions of Americans have pre-existing conditions. My guess is most people in this room are taking medications with some regularity. You or someone you know has that pre-existing condition. And you probably know someone who's frightened that their medicine will be cut off or they will prematurely meet their lifetime cap on these benefits. Think about it. Everyone in this room probably knows someone with a disabled child as well, a child who needs specialized care. We need to tell their stories. Each of us is aware of the countless Jewish nursing home residents, many of whom are Holocaust survivors desperately relying on Medicaid. They deserve the best care possible. People needing health care are our family, they're our friends, and our community. We are those people in need. Our voices matter. Make that call. Write that email. Stop by your senator's office before you leave town, or visit the district office or town hall meeting in your community when you get home. The fight isn't over. Whatever the Senate does in the next few days will not be the end of the deliberations ahead of us. Citizen action has caused efforts to simply repeal and replace, for the efforts to simply repeal and replace to be stalled for months. Our voices do make a difference, whether it's on the legislation that Meredith talked about, with a loophole that is devastating, whether it's for Planned Parenthood, whether it's for that disabled child, whether it's for the person on Medicaid. Our voices need to be loud, need to be clear, need to be passionate. I never expected that my life's work would be in the areas of women's empowerment, but I can tell you, it's time to resist. As Hillel once brilliantly said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, who am I? If not now, when? Thank you.
Thank you to our stellar panel. I am inspired, awed, moved by your presentations. And just a couple of notes. To Adina Ellison. Adina, I hope you're in the room someplace. Thank you so much for stepping up at the last minute, researching, providing materials for us, and just getting us, just understanding our Women's League group. So we thank you very much. And to Lisa Kogan, I don't know when this woman sleeps, honestly. Her enthusiasm, inspiration, intelligence, energy just made this program happen. We could not have done it without you. Thank you so much, Lisa. And one final note, in our other room where we're going for our advocacy sessions, you will see a postcard prepared by Women's League which supports and promotes the positions taken by our panelists today. There will also be information as to how to send it to your congresspeople. Please, take what you've learned today, be inspired, take action, and do it. Take a postcard, sign it, and send it. It will and can make a difference. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our International Women's League President, Margie Miller.
Bad thing about this convention, they forgot the tissues on every podium. All right, you're lucky I'm a New Yorker. Everyone knows how quickly I speak. When I was convention chair, other than the gefilte fish, the biggest complaint was we had too many good programs at the same time and too many good speakers. I must humbly admit, you exceeded. This was a fabulous convention. And I only have two things to say, but I'm going to add a third one in. To the Canadian women who are sitting here, I am very mindful that you're here, and many examples were United States-based. The action is yours to take as well. So please, for these issues, these are universal issues in many places, so please don't be insulted. These are actions that you can take in the North Country. So thank you, Louise. Eleanor, bonjour. Two quickies. It is our tradition at convention at close that we announce the next convention chairs. We cannot announce our location because now we're going to have a 3-year interval, so we're not up to that. But I do, before I charge off and end this convention, want to announce that we have 2 vice chairs and a new convention chair for the year 2020. So let me introduce Marilyn Berkowitz from Pacific Southwest, Vice Chair of Logistics. And where is my friend Eileen Rubin, Vice Chair of Program? I guess the gal sitting next door is the next one, our new convention chair, Debbie Goldich. I asked you to take convention home with you, and I think this session this morning is a perfect thing to take home with you. You know that blessings are 2 parts, a blessing of the words, and to complete the blessing is the action. You have listened today. Hopefully you've learned today. Now go home and take action. The advocates will be in Salon 5. For those that are not staying for the board meeting, please take advantage of their time they did generously given this morning. Spend a few moments and take some positive action, and let's go out and make our voices heard. Thank you, safe travels, and I love you all. Thank you. That's it, right?